Cheers, everyone.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Kale here with Mac. Coming back at you. This is our second time on air together. So super excited to kind of uh, touch on some topics that we didn't get to last time. Our last conversation I thought went really well. Um, I think it was the right place to start actually. The more that I thought about it, it was less structured, but uh, I think it bore a lot of fruit. I think, especially if we kind of um, almost center our material or topics towards the benefit of not just any particular group, but specifically towards the development growth of the individual. Um, so yeah, I thought our last conversation went really well. Um, so yeah, so welcome everybody. Mac, how are you doing today, brother?
Amazing. Amazing. Besides from I'm hungover. I got a delivery today. Yeah, I'm hungover because I became single. That's why. So, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then, yeah, I got a delivery today. It was a package of chocolate with psilocybin and lion's mane in it. It was like a microdose package. It's illegal in Denmark, but I apparently have a deal now. So
How wait,
it's
how how is that how is that illegal in Denmark? I thought Denmark was where you went to consume drugs that were illegal everywhere else.
yeah, yeah. Denmark is really weird. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we had like
So
fucked up laws like decades ago. It was like you could fuck animals. That was legal, but you couldn't take mushrooms. It's like there's no logic in it.
are psilocybin mushrooms specifically illegal, or is it portobello mushrooms, lion's mane, every variety of mushroom, or
Yeah, they made every kind of eatable mushrooms illegal. It's just like they just
really?
hate mushrooms. So
Hmm.
no, I'm just kidding. It's only the psilocybin
Oh, okay,
compound.
okay.
So, would be funny though if they just
Yeah, 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 yeah.
fuck
Well,
mushrooms. Uh,
because if I'm unless I'm mistaken, I think heroin's legal in Denmark, right? If it's done, am I is Denmark where Amsterdam is?
no, no,
No, okay,
no. That's
okay.
Netherlands, but
Netherlands,
but
okay,
like we are
okay.
culturally same.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, but we have some progressive laws regarding drug use for people in rehab. So
Okay.
so they're pretty charitable towards drug addicts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in Scandinavia in general. A prison cell in Denmark looks like a New York apartment. Like
Yeah, yeah.
a but
Well,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, everything is surprisingly good in the context. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. And yeah,
good. Yeah,
and
so
you?
I'm doing really well. Feeling a lot better than I did last week. Um, and yeah, just getting things. I actually got my studio a little more set up. Moved into a new place not too long ago, and so you'll see me live streaming sometimes from here, sometimes from a place I have up in Louisville, which is actually built out of or a restored Catholic nunnery. So
Mm,
it's really cool. We got really high vaulted ceilings, and it actually looks like an apartment you would get, like a restored loft or something that you would get in Scandinavia, honestly, or somewhere in Europe, right? Where they renovate older buildings and try to be as least intrusive as they can, but while obviously upgrading it as much as possible,
mm.
right? So you'll see me live streaming between here and there. Still need to kind of get the dimensions right on the camera, but yeah,
Yeah,
still
because I
doing really
remember
well.
the first time I saw you on, I think it was the Crucible with the. I just saw the American flag. The first time I was like, you just look like a good old patriot. And then when you
That's right.
switch the camera, I was like, holy shit, you got every most inclusive person on earth having
That's
every
right.
religious spiritual
Right.
symbol.
Well, and I also have
You got all
the
holy shit.
yeah, I got the Penrose triangle, right, which is the symbol of the church. Yin
Yeah.
Yang for Taoism. I have a multicolored Native American dream catcher. It's not an authentic dream catcher because it's just a mass fabricated one, but still, I love the kind of symbolism there. I have an ohm symbol, right? Which is really hard to see on camera, actually.
It is possible.
Got
Yeah, we can. It's pretty clear.
yeah, and then got a Celtic cross, and I have a Egyptian ankh right here, and obviously the Jewish, what would that be called? I can't even think of the name right now. The and then I have an Islamic prayer rug actually, so got that from a really good friend.
Dude, man, that's amazing.
Yeah. Hey, that does make sense though. To just see an American flag behind me and think
Yes.
I'm a good old patriot, which I am. I'm absolutely patriotic, but not in a exclusively nationalistic sense. Obviously, just pride in one's own
Yeah.
heritage. And, right.
Amazing, man.
Good. So yeah, let's kind of dive into it. By the way, I'll ask at the end of the stream, so think about it while you're going through this live stream with us here today, guys. I'm going to ask at the end that you consider subscribing. We're at 50 right now. We're trying to boost these numbers. We're just getting started. Obviously, share, like, subscribe, and help us out in any way. But really, even more than any of those, just engagement. We're trying to build a genuine community, starting online, and as things progress and move forward, we're hoping to do things IRL, right, in real life. So,
And I want to add that, yeah, if we hit, or when we hit 1 million subscribers, me and Kale will take our clothes off and do a stream of naked. So please subscribe. You wanna
right.
experience it.
And only a modest fig leaf, to hide the goodies, right? Other than that, yeah. No, hey, oh man, you know what's going to happen, right? We're going to hit 1 million subscribers, and somebody's going to pull up this old live stream, and we're going to be held to it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But we'll do it.
I'm looking forward. You gotta do what you gotta do in these in this age of OnlyFans, because
That's right.
sex is selling.
That's right. We can't let the feminine expression get all the glory and money on this part, right?
Yeah, and what's better than doing it in the name of God? You know.
That's right.
Being a good servant.
We're going back pre-fall is what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's right. Very nice.
Some crazy shit are gonna happen on this channel. Just saying.
That's right.
Stay tuned.
That's right. Well, hey, let's do something I've been trying to do for a while. I just have had no success whatsoever. And let's try to actually introduce the church, some of the overarching theological, philosophical underpinnings of kind of just our belief structure in a more obviously systematic sense, right? And just beginning with the general question of what is Infiniti Church, and please help me on this. But I think that the best place to start from is simply through a statement of the belief that we are all God, dreaming that we're not. And obviously, the way that we define those terms could have really big implications of what that actually means, right? What we're not saying is that we are gods, little g or plural, but rather just taking that statement, we are God, dreaming we are not, would signify and indicate a singularity to our nature, to our being, to the root of and core of who we are as individuals, right? And so we are all God, dreaming that we're not. And there's a lot of, as I'm sure you're well aware of, a lot of Wattsian influence in that statement. I think he had it's actually posted on the YouTube channel. There's a famous, well-known talk that he gave, where he gave this analogy of what you would do if you had, if you were able to dream any dream that you could dream, at night, say slipping 80 years of subjective time into 8 hours of sleep, and that you had an eternity to dream these dreams. And he kind of dives down that rabbit hole and says something to the effect of, at first you would indulge in every pleasure you could, great music, dancing, women, every pleasure, highs without lows, highs without hangovers, right?
Yes,
And
that would be great.
that's that. Yes, absolutely. Um, and just dives down that rabbit hole and says, how long would you indulge in that perfect dream? And like any great movie or any great song that you listen to the point where it becomes normal, becomes common, becomes outplayed or outdated. Eventually, even our favorite songs we can kind of get tired of. And he makes that same analogy with dreaming. He says, if you conceived or devised a perfect dream with the best pleasures, that on a long enough time scale, a few months, say of 80 years of subjective time dreamt every night, that you'd get to the point where you'd be looking for something different. And he moves that analogy from just pleasures and bliss, and kind of carnal sensations, right, to where you'd want to put a wrinkle in that plot, right? You'd want to have um, dramas or contests, right? Not just great love affairs, but you'd want to get to the point where there was a plot in the story, or should I say what is it called when you have a problem in the arc of a movie? A conflict. You want to
Mm.
have some type of conflict and resolution, right? So you'd invent enemies or adversaries, or like I said, love affairs where it's not just straightforward, but where you have to save a princess from a dragon, or something to that effect. And so where you'd start kind of going down this rabbit hole of creating different different story arcs, different themes, and that he speculates that you get to a point where you'd get so adventurous, because you'd always wake up, is what he says, right? That you'd get so adventurous that you think up a new wrinkle, and that new wrinkle would be to dream of a dream in which you forgot that you were dreaming, and what that would mean, because it would be so great when you woke up, because you'd always wake up, and you'd wake up only to realize that it was a dream that whole time when you didn't think it was. And then he speculates that given an eternity of time, and an infinite multiplicity of possibility of what you could dream, that eventually you'd get to the point where you'd dream every life that you could dream up to, and including the dream of the life that we're living now. And he kind of makes that parallel with God, right?
Mm.
Have you seen that particular video?
No, I haven't seen it, but I really resonated with the statement. And I think for people watching, that the interesting thing would probably be if to dive into the whole argument for why this is so. Because I remember my youth. I'm still pretty young, but when I was a teenager, I had zero gravitation towards any form of religious or spiritual affiliation. I didn't have a percentage of um, connection to the divine in any way, shape, or form. And I couldn't understand the religious position or the spiritual position at all. Like, I could not relate to it at all. Even if I tried the most, it didn't make any sense for me. And I understand that that is the starting point for many people in the West now and the rest of the world, but especially in the West, they have no ability to tune in to what we're talking about right now. For them, when they're listening to the conversation, it will sound like nonsense. They cannot resonate with it. And then I thought about, okay, what would be a way of not necessarily convincing, because I don't have the need for
That's right.
convincing people. I don't have that
I
feeling
love it.
now being let's say a believer in whatever we are trying to convey right now.
Right.
But I'm beginning to realize the the mental health aspect of it also, in such a way that I understand now why you would preach in a way to help people, but in a more uh, friendly and polite manner,
Yeah.
um, to get people in. But the point was just that I thought about how you could convey the argument so that people who are listening who cannot tune or in with the topic, or they cannot connect with it because they are stuck in this atheistic materialistic worldview. How would you talk to them? How would you convey them
Hmm.
for them to even listen? And I came up with the conclusion that this is almost impossible because of the fact that it's not a analytical or logical um, thing. It's a the argument lies in um, the direct experience of it, and it's beyond language. It's non-conceptual. So the direct experience you need to have to I don't want to use the word convert, but let's say that the thing that will just snap for you where I go, I get it now.
Hmm.
That lies in a deep mystical experience. That is also why mystical experiences are so profound and have been so in many traditions, because that's where you get the deep conviction of noticing that you are united with what we call God, and we have different names for it. But this is a universal experience that any human can have. When people get that experience, that's when their worldview collapses, and they it's not necessarily that they create a narrative around it, but they just have this profound mystical experience, and it will be life changing.
Yep.
It is, and it's like you could, if I'm it's not based on even on an argument in itself that I can give. It's an experience, and so you can use some logic and have profound arguments to convey people, but I don't think it will work. I can only try to it could be a pointer towards the experience for people who are interested, and I would say there's only two free ways to get it. The first way is most easiest way that people are using right now. It's psychedelic induced substances. That is the fastest and most clear way to get the experience, um, to get this mystical experience of union with God. Otherwise, you have people who are practicing meditation for a long time.
A long
Uh,
time.
the thing is that it's yeah it requires a lot of discipline and practice for maybe decades
Hmm.
to even get close to a psychedelic experience and getting into that realm, to that degree, because psychedelic experiences are pretty they can be brutal in good and bad ways. And then
Absolutely.
there is people also we know that just get the experience out of nowhere, which is quite fascinating in and of itself. They can just stand like in front of the beach, watch the sunset, and then they
Yep.
just get this mystical, profound experience. And you also have people experiencing near-death experiences that also get this union, this mystical experience again, uniting, getting out of their body, uniting with the all-powerful, infinite consciousness that we all are. And I just know now this is the way for people to notice what we are talking about, is to get into that experience. There's
Yep.
many ways of doing it, but I would say definitely for people who are unsure about what we are talking about, the fastest way would definitely be through a psychedelic experience. That's why
Yeah.
I'm such a big fan of the psychedelic community. It just needs some kind of it needs a community. It needs some
Yep.
order to it, because
Yes.
it's the psychedelic experience is just synonymous with chaos. It's completely chaotic. It's
Well,
yeah.
so actually, so to that point, let me say this: that hearing you, one might logically ask the question: if that's so true, then why did the '60s piddle out in the United States? The '60s psychedelic countercultural revolution. Why did it piddle out towards the end of the decade and become consumed with and synonymous with drug use and whatnot. And what I want to say is a couple of things. Mac is absolutely right that, and I'll give an illustration that Alan Watts uses to this too. That perhaps the fastest, but perhaps the most brutal and raw path to enlightenment or realization, however you want to coin that term, is through psychedelics. And that the only problem with the 60s is because that was really from a societal level, I think one of the first times that we had that abrasive introduction and opening to the world of psychedelics. And I think that the biggest issue with the 60s was simply confusing the means with the end. That Mac is absolutely right. Psychedelics, both him and I have had experiences that are indelible with who we are and who we've come to understand ourselves to be in our spiritual journey that wouldn't be that way apart from psychedelics. And that the biggest thing about it is that psychedelic is a tool. It's a means to the end of realization or enlightenment. It is not itself the end, right? So it's not about the drug, but rather about how the drug can allow us to get to a point of gnosis, right? And that Alan Watts, just to back up what Mac's saying, Alan Watts actually has a video where he talks about there are generally 4 paths to enlightenment. There's the monk who goes away in his isolation to contemplate reality. Think of Zen Buddhists using aesthetic practices of staring at a wall or facing a wall, staring at the nothingness at the back of their eyes, waiting decades perhaps to attain enlightenment. There's then he also mentions the Sakya and the priest and how these are very orderly, structured, but very slow means of spiritual progression and realization. Whereas he says that the 4th path is the Joker, and the Joker, very much like what Mac was saying, they can come to a sudden realization. There's difficulties inherent within that path, I think, and so it's not. Yeah, I think there's inherent difficulties or things that should be taken with caution, but the path through psychedelics and with psychedelics can be a very uniquely vivid and a very accelerated path. Exactly what Mac was saying, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Also, let me say one last thing to reiterate what Mac was saying about being able to understand the truth of reality from multiple different fields or disciplines or perspectives. There very much is a religious perspective, and so when I lay out the statement, "We are all God, dreaming that we're not," that's a very religious and an intentionally religious statement. It's piggybacking on the Western Abrahamic traditions. You could say we are all Allah, dreaming that we're not. But it is very Western, it is very Abrahamic, and it is very religious, right? Let me give a few statements of that, or a few iterations of that same statement, given from different perspectives. For instance, mathematically, specifically Georg-Cantor's set theory and other iterations of set theory, you could say that we are all that infinity is the set of all sets, both a set and yet not. Or from a cosmological philosophical perspective, you could say that infinity is the uncaused cause of all effects, and yet the effect of no cause outside of it. Philosophically, you could say the same thing by saying that we are all we are less modes of the one, and more the one experiencing itself modally. Spiritually, you could say that we are a singular conscious being conceiving itself fractally. Or even better yet, we are a single infinite subject perceiving itself as a multitude of finite objects. One of my favorite, perhaps, is the that same statement, we are all God, dreaming that we're not geared towards Eastern Orthodox, which have a very explicit triadology, very explicit language and framework of understanding the inner Trinitarian relationship between Father, Son, and Spirit. And in that way, you can say that we're all the same essay, we're all the same essence, we're all the same ousia, we're all the same essay instantiated by distinct personae. That might not mean anything to you, but to a very specific group of people, that has a very explicit meaning to them, right? We're all the same being, dreaming that we're different persons. And here's perhaps one of my favorite. We are all infinity, experiencing what it's like not to be. We are all God, dreaming that we're not, that we are somehow now pivoting out from our center of inherent unity, so that you and I, who are actually one being, can instead experience ourselves as two separate and distinct things.
Yes.
So exactly to what Mac was saying, that there's no necessity to consider it or come to this topic or this worldview, this ideology, from a religious perspective, secular, atheistic, mathematical, physical, philosophical, theological. There are ways to understand the same truth in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. It's really just realizing that all religious attempts to get to an absolute understanding is basically just one interpretation of this deep direct experience of the divine truth that is non-conceptual. So every religious attempt to nail it down and come up with a book that would contain all the truth about reality is just an attempt to grasp and firstly, it's an attempt to interpret these mystical experiences that we're all capable of having. But then they're doing something really profoundly interesting from a psychological perspective, which is that this is my belief, that most religions came about also from an existential perspective. They were trying to also get away and cope with the chaotic element of not understanding, because it's just rooted in anxiety. The ability to let go and surrender to the fact that we cannot know things absolutely is so hard for people, and I understand why. I struggle with this too. And so we humans, we need a strong identity, we need a community, we need rules to navigate ourselves morally and also just physically in reality. So there's just a big pressure on us to come up and invent a narrative that will guide us. So so that's essentially what's going on. It's just a book. All religions boil down to some kind of, it's a like navigational system. Like this narrative is just there for us to feel whole and have order in a really chaotic reality. And it gives you that. So it has, it's like Xanax. It's just when you get that, when you become, for example, religious, there's a deep, profound healing because you just feel whole again. You have a purpose now. You have direction. You have an identity. You're on the good side. Everybody's on the bad side. You get the whole package, and it's so satisfying, like a drug. So there is some truth to. I don't know how to say the quote from Karl Marx when he, in English, but he said something like that: religion is the opium of the people.
Oh, yeah.
There's some truth to that statement. There's also a lack of truth to it, but the point was just that when you observe that in yourself, if that's what the religious text is giving you, you'll be so attached to that narrative that if I'm trying now to convey you or argue for it's not the case, you will be so attached to that narrative because it's synonymous with your survival, psychological survival, that you will fight it instantly. It like you would not even be open to it, because being open would be like a threat to your identity as a person. So when you get over that, you get beyond that, you will be in a brief moment in your life in chaos, because then who are you? What's reality? Where should you go? You have to like start from scratch, inventing all the answers to these deep philosophical questions about morality, epistemology, all these questions. They're just gone. Now you have to start over again,
Yep.
and it's not fun. So like my journey too, when I was after my really intense DMT trips, was just this state of like pure anxiety and chaos. Like I was so confused. But in that state, the only thing that was like grounding me was just, as you talked about, this union, this mystical experience of being one with God, being God, noticing that my consciousness, my awareness, was the same awareness in you, in anybody else who are watching right now. The raw qualia of consciousness, this weird thing, this weird phenomenon of experiencing in itself. That's the feeling you want to tune into. This That's why they call it the hard problem of consciousness, because
That's right.
it's so goddamn weird that you're experiencing. If you like pay attention to it, if you become mindful of it, you can really be freaked out and can feel like pretty psychotic if you like when you do that. And it's not for fun. I don't know if you noticed, anybody have seen the studies on this. There are people becoming psychotic through meditation. They're actually
Yeah.
warning. There's like a little warning label to it when you. There are people who are the same people who are. What's the English word for it? They're like more attuned to becoming schizophrenic and psychotic when they meditate. And it's pretty interesting. I think that's why. And the same is when people are involving themselves in psychedelic use. They can
Yeah.
also have a tendency to become psychotic, because it is a psychotic experience in and of itself, because there's just this grand breakdown of boundaries.
Hmm.
But yeah, the point was, in the unity with God, you will just experience the truth, because you will be um, just completely absorbed in this divine, non-dual love, this is ecstatic feeling, this blissful feeling of just being love. It's not that you are experiencing yourself as experience feeling love. It's a higher experience of love, united with everything in this peaceful state where you just get a glimpse that you understand everything, but
Hmm.
it's non-conceptual. You just get this feeling, you finally get it, you understand everything,
Hmm.
and then you wake up from the experience again and goes back into
Yeah.
this reality. But that's the way to start, get that experience fast as possible, and then begin. And then the question is, what do you do then? Now you have this experience, you're like plugged back into the matrix that we're in right now. What do you do with it, and
Hmm.
how do you explain it? And this is where the conversation is leading now, because as you said, the question then becomes, why are God dreaming that he's not? What is the purpose of this?
Right.
And it raises a lot of the questions about, as we talked about, the problem of evil. Like, for example, why most religious texts are trying to solve this problem by creating a moral system, and you have to follow that, and then condemn all the evil in the world, and then you're on the good side, and then you become uh, not sacrifice, the other word. You will you'll get access to this heavenly realm by acting like a good servant of God, for example. And I think our answer to that is, when people are asking the question, why is there evil in the world? And the profound answer to that is, or why would God allow evil? The first thing to notice is that's a label we put evil. That's a label we put on it, but it's still a profound experience of something not being enjoyable. And the first thing I would answer to that is, why would you go and watch the movie, The Human Centipede? Have you seen that movie, Kale? That horrible.
No, human centipede.
Yeah, I think it's called that. It's like horror. Okay, I cannot even talk about it. Like, let's use another example. It's a gross movie, but it's really problem. Let's take Paranormal Activity or something, or like a movie with what's the most brutal movie you have ever seen, where it's like it's really fucked up and it's like almost damaging psychologically.
Saw.
Yeah, so exactly.
Yeah.
So the reason is, why are so many people going in and watching Saw if evil and if feeling evil things is so bad? And then people go like, that's quite interesting. I never thought about,
Yeah.
why am I indulging myself eating fucking popcorn and chocolate with my friends watching this movie, sitting like collectively watching people getting uh, decapitated and tortured.
Right.
I mean, why people are paying money for it?
Hmm.
You know, and the answer is to experience it.
Yep.
And then the question
Exactly
is,
right.
why would you want to experience it? And the answer to that is because there's insight in it. It gives you, it's like a puzzle. When you get like one, what is it called in English? Like one item of the puzzle. What is it?
Uh, piece of the puzzle, or
Just a piece of the, I don't know, like, yeah. It adds a piece to it, but we don't know consciously why we're doing it. We're just enjoying it some weird way. There's a weird enjoyment in watching that movie Saw. And it's because you want to experience the full spectrum of this dualistic realm. So the question is, why do you want to, again, indulge yourself in evil? It's because it gives you deeper insight into the polarity and the opposite of evil. It gives you more insight into what's good,
yep.
because it's interconnected. It's
Hmm.
like this, and let me maybe create an analogy for people to understand. You cannot really enjoy and be grateful for food and being um, full of eating if you haven't been starving.
Yep.
It's the moment you're starving, let's say, or even maybe you're starving so much that you get the fear of maybe dying somehow. You're in a situation where you cannot get food. When you then get food, you're so grateful for the food. You're so grateful for being alive. You become you get so many insights about
It
reality in that
tastes
state
better.
of suffering. It tastes better, yeah. It's like you get a clear vision of everything, what matters, everything. That's why this spectrum is created in the first place, because there's insight and wisdom in it.
Hmm.
That's why you watch these horrible uh, torture movies. That's the same, to experience that evil, because it makes you appreciate the good
Yep.
and value it. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. So again, to just understand the problem with evil, the answer to it is that, yeah, God are creating these experiences, this spectrum, to experience the full realm of it. That's
Yep.
the reason. So there's nothing inherently good or bad in it. It's just to experience it, because the good is contained in the bad. The bad is contained in the good. So you cannot enjoy food without being hungry first. You need the pain of hunger to be motivated to get food and to be excited and anticipating the enjoyment of eating. Without you being, starving, you cannot enjoy the meal. If you're already full, if you didn't have the experience of being hungry, you cannot enjoy eating.
Yep.
If there wasn't suffering or pain, you cannot enjoy pleasure, because you would already
Yep.
then just be in pleasure. It doesn't make any sense like that. When you're moving towards pleasure, you're moving away from pain. So you need the pain in order to enjoy in the first place.
Yep.
It makes you get it. It's
What?
like, yeah,
Yeah. One gives meaning to the other, and coming back to something I had mentioned from Alan Watts' work, where he said that you get to the point in this progression of dreams where you introduce a problem, because until you have a problem, you can't have a solution. And just think about modern cinema or great literary novels. There's no novel or movie that, with maybe perhaps the rarest of exceptions, that you can think of that doesn't have a conflict introduced somewhere in the movie. Without a conflict, you have no movie. And even in a comical example like Seinfeld, which was supposed to be a TV show about nothing, even in those TV shows about nothing, they were solving problems. Um, and so you're exactly right. Without a problem, you can't have a solution. Without hunger, you couldn't know what satiation was, right? Or you couldn't be truly satiated. It's actually a trick that I've used for the past couple of years. When there's a item of food that I don't like, I wait until I'm really hungry to try it because it's the best opportunity for me to actually appreciate it. Because I don't like Parmesan chicken, or at least the idea of Parmesan chicken. But you get me hungry enough, and I can taste it in a way that is not repulsive to me, right? Or I
Yeah,
at least there's a chance of me appreciating it for what it is, regardless of what I think it is, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And then you begin to notice the genius, the, the the genius way of the design, that it's it's so meaningful. And it doesn't mean that you will now begin to uh, like the suffering and pain. Like, you will not. That's what it is. You are in that polarity, then you will of course be experiencing pain and suffering, but it gives meaning to it. So when you are experiencing intense suffering or pain, you're doing it in a context of understanding it in a profound way that makes it easier to go through it. So it's not a cure
Mhm.
uh, towards solving it in that way. You cannot. It's a part of the design that you must surrender to, but you can do it in a context of meaning, or you can do it without a context of meaning. If you're doing it from a materialistic worldview, it seems meaningless.
Mhm.
That's why you don't have a context to interpretate the suffering. You can create one, of course, but understanding that it's a part of the good. It's actually the function, or answer to why there is good in the first place, going through
Mhm.
this suffering. Then it becomes easy to just get into a flow state and go through it, noticing that it's already containing the good in it. And it actually can even make you seek more suffering and pain, because you will then notice that you will enjoy more. That's the whole point of asceticism. It's actually that when you're doing that, you're just enjoying, as you said, your senses are being more, you're more aware of the experience. It gets more intense when you are being when you are anticipating the what you want
Yep.
by not indulging in it. That's why, like, people doing fasting, for example, they notice they can become addicted to the feeling of just just you can enjoy the feeling of anticipation, this dopamine release of just anticipating so much that you can get addicted to the state of actually almost not wanting to have the satisfaction. Like,
Yes.
you don't want the thing
The
you want actually.
the delayed gratification of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. Like, I experimented with this a lot, and
Well, and we do this,
it's so
and we do.
crazy. Like, what? Sorry.
No, I was going to say we do the same thing in terms of physical training, right? So if I wake up one morning, I wake up to a baseline of dopamine. The first thing I do is eat a bunch of donuts and lay around on the couch. I'm going to exhaust my dopamine and go into a deficit where there's almost a rebound effect. So I go up. What goes up must come down, right? So if I start the day off laying around the couch, eating donuts and scrolling on my phone, presumably, unless it's corrected sometime throughout the day, that day is going to have it's going to be I'm going to be more sensitive to pain, and I'm going to be more in a dopamine deficit because I spent so much on the beginning. Whereas if the first thing I did was when I woke up was pound some water and work out, well, that's enduring pain. That's that's intentionally exposing yourself to pain to have the exact opposite rebound to where now for the rest of the day, my baseline, my dopamine baseline is lower, not higher, and to where I'm most likely going to run a dopamine surplus as opposed to a negative deficit, right? And so we do it.
Exactly.
We do it all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, yeah, exactly. And you can just remember now, if you're going through suffering, you can just anticipate the the blissful state of when you get out of it. If you are in a suffering from a depression or anxiety or whatever it is, you can almost, the motivation for keeping going forward is just this connection you have with your future self being free of that that's that diagnosis that will set you free, because you know it will be so pleasurable, and you know that your life will be transformed in a way most ordinary people won't. If you get out of a serious depression, you get out, if you really get out of that, overcoming it, and you'll have, like we talked about, you'll be so aware of reality in a pleasurable way that most people are not just being living in a non-intense state of not really enjoying life. They're not depressed, but they're not super happy about life either. The guy coming out of depression will come out of that depression with a new, profound understanding of his or her life that will add so much meaning to it that they will just enjoy being present in the moment, walking around, talking with people. They will have a deep understanding of what it means to be alive, that somebody who hasn't experienced it. So in that way, the the problem of evil is solved in that way. Yeah, that
Yeah.
there is a in every negative there is a positive. It's embedded in it, and we talked about that in the last chat. If you imagine visually the yin yang symbol, you know
Yeah.
that the white dot is in the black part, and vice versa. But then you just imagine it infinitely, that if you take you have the black part with the white dot in it, but in a white dot you then have a black part with a white dot, and then it just goes on like a fractal dynamic movement infinitely. So it you like when something bad happens, you're viewing it from an isolated instance in your personal history. If you zoom out and see your timeline, see how it shifts, like then you see it's like basically it's just this: you're getting hungry, you eat, getting hungry, you eat. It's just like this rhythm. It's
Mm-hmm.
also one of the laws in the Kabbalion, like the principle of rhythm. There's this rhythm
Mm-hmm.
to the cosmos that is going through, and the same with pain and pleasure. You need the rhythm to keep on moving forward. And so whatever you're going through right now, no matter how intense it is, the more intense it actually is on the pain side, the more pleasure is waiting you on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yep.
that's it, it's you are lucky in that way. In a really fucked up way, if you are like suffering from a severe depression, and you like when you get out of it, you will have an incredible life. It's like that most people cannot. You cannot go there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's really a sad thing to realize in some way that you most people are not going through these like painful states of mind. They cannot get to that blissful state. There's no pressure to unlocking it, if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then
No, you're exactly right.
everything becomes perfectly perfectly out of control. It's just
Mm-hmm. Well, and
this design, yeah.
let me say this to what you've just spoken of, the problem of evil in theological or Abrahamic traditions. It's referred to as the theodicy, right?
Yes.
It's the problem of evil. And it's perhaps, I would say, up there with one of the top three biggest issues that any Judeo Christian worldview has to deal with because of their inability to, or their difficulty trying to answer it. And the description, or should I say, the explanation of the problem of evil from our perspective or from an Eastern philosophical perspective is so much more robust, complete, and logical than why would an all good being introduce evil if it wasn't for good, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so just even on that simple level of from an apologetic standpoint, from um, a comparative standpoint, worldview, comparing worldviews, um, that 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 explanation is so much more complete and robust than almost any that can be given by Christians, Jews, or Muslims, um, uh, in their, proper, should I say, the more structured, organized versions of it. Um, but let's get back to something that you had said earlier, because this touches on something that we touched on last time. We were talking about the psychological propensity of people to hold to their worldviews and their beliefs and their opinions in such a way to where if you threaten it, they almost react as if you're threatening them physically, or you're threatening their something deep and personal, like you're actually taking something from them, right? And I think we had touched on it, that the what worldviews and ideologies and beliefs and opinions do for people, right or wrong. It could be a correct opinion, incorrect opinion, true belief, an untrue belief. That what ideologies, worldviews, beliefs end up doing for the human mind, essentially, is providing or attempting to provide certainty in a world that we inherently perceive as uncertain, right? And it's something that you had just touched on, we had touched on last week, and I think is a perfect segue into epistemology. You'd actually touched on this right before you had mentioned that certainty aspect of feeling threatened just by feeling as if your worldview is being questioned, pushed, or refuted in some way. You had said that there's so little that we can hold with absolute certainty, right? That's what we're trying to do essentially, or that's what worldviews, Christians, almost any ideology, political, religious, philosophical, what worldviews are essentially trying to do is provide an element of certainty in an uncertain world, and so much more is held as absolutes than what I think you and I would agree can be, right? Even you and I, who have a belief of some type of a god or a deity, which I think our understanding of that is more broad than it is narrow, but that even that we hold with certain degrees of relative openness, right? Whether it's the interpretation of it, how we classify it or understand it, or the like. When we speak of absolute certainty, what are some of what is something that you think that we can hold? What's perhaps the most certain thing that we can hold as an absolute, or what is
Yeah,
something that we can hold with it as an absolute?
yeah. I really used like decades on contemplating um, this question in epistemology, because I think it is at the root of the whole talk about God as a universal for explaining everything else. And it's funny enough, you see it in the history of philosophy, philosopher after another trying to solve this problem, because it's a goddamn hard issue if you take it seriously. That's
Mm-hmm.
why if you must have a personality that is leading toward openness in a high degree
Mm-hmm.
to get to these truths, because you have to. There's so much suffering just going through giving up everything you thought was true.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
I've been you've been there. I assume too. Like I've been there
yeah.
too, and it's annoying. Like it's so annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like a um
You
yeah,
trying to
undescribably annoying,
yeah. Try
existentially
get
like. But
go ahead.
the answer like to the question that I came, like it came through just reading, studying philosophy like a maniac, trying to solve the problem with this high degree of openness towards me being wrong. So not attaching myself to any position until something clicked in me where I could say for certainty that this was it. Now I finally got here, and it where I am now, it's stuck in a paradox that actually led me to an argument for why the paradox is like a glitch in this matrix pointing you towards God again.
Yeah,
So I was reading a lot of postmodern literature in philosophy, studying Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and the rest. A lot of French postmodernists that people hate, and I know I understand why I don't like the radical leftist type promoting this aspect of postmodernism, but there is a lot of literature that's not noticed that there's a link between postmodernism and spirituality and mysticism that even the postmodernists are not don't want to acknowledge. They hate that, but it's pretty profound. There's a book called, I can recommend this for anyone interested in these topics. It's called Healing Deconstruction. Because as this was the project of Jacques Derrida, deconstruct. What do you say? How do you say it in English? Deconstructivism. I don't know, like. But this was his.
Deconstructivism.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, his Jacques Derrida's project was deconstructing narratives, showing that when you have a polarity, that you take a side on that spectrum of anything. Could be left-leaning politics, right-leaning politics. Just showing that when you say this is the truth, you just show you that you can take another stand that would be equally valid. Like you have no way of knowing that is the truth. That one perspective out of infinite interpretations. And the genius of the postmodern position that got me to this paradox was just that they were all saying the same thing, that essentially that truth is relative. And then the classical problem with that sentence is that then it implies that it's absolutely certain that truth is relative. So it's self-detonating, the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But they were actually honoring that. That was the funny thing, saying everything is relative. It means it's relative that everything is relative. But it also means that it must be true that everything is relative. But then if it's absolutely true that it's relative, it's not relative. So we're stuck in a paradox with these sentences. And we cannot solve them. We can solve them on a deep level that I will try to get to now. But the thing is just noticing that you cannot do it. It's the same if I ask a person to, or if I ask you, Kale, like if you can show me that logic is logical without referring to logic.
To logic, yep.
It's exactly impossible.
Right. Yep.
You cannot do that. And so every conclusion that we come up with linguistically must be circular by definition. Mm-hmm. And that's a fallacy. We don't like that. But the problem again becomes the paradox is we are trapped in the paradox conceptually all the time, because even me stating that, I'm stating it as a truth statement, which we just established that I cannot do. Mm-hmm. So it's like an infinite paradox evolving and never ending. So what do we do about that? Well, the only thing we do is noticing that therefore the truth must be beyond the conceptual realm that we are diving into. And just one argument, for example, Jacques Derrida had his argument was that the truth is always delayed in that way. When you have a sentence, for example, if you have a word, a dog, for example, take the word dog, and then you ask me, Magnus, what is a dog? I have to refer to another word to describe what a dog is, and then I say dog is an animal. You are in your full right to then say, but what is an animal, Mark? And then be like, I must refer to another word to explain the other word. This goes on infinitely. There will never be a point where you can say, this is the final absolute definition of a dog. We can add. It just goes on forever. Like you take up in a word book, these, and you just take any word. And it says dog, animal. Then you search up animal in the book, animal, some other definition. Then you can search. It goes on like infinitely. Yeah. Okay, so the argument is that in epistemology that it's just a paradox. Truth is not accessible in a conceptual realm, but it also is. It must be at the same time for us to come to that conclusion. So the way out of it is. Jacques Derrida got to this conclusion. Wittgenstein had a good picture of it. It's like you take a ladder to the rooftop, and then when you get there, you throw the ladder away. The ladder is language. It's using our analytical minds to get to this truth, or noticing that something is wrong in this conceptual realm, and then leaving it. That means you can go back using it with this knowledge, but the truth of it is non-conceptual. You get a sense of it. And so I believe now that there is this form of logos, this, you can say, universal Wi-Fi we're connected to, where we can download information. This information is non-conceptual. We get this through intuition, which is it must be a deeper language of some kind of interconnected frequency of somehow that we. And I think this is the realm where most psychic people are living their day-to-day life, or people who are highly intuitive and can read people. People are really good at mind reading, all this cold reading. Um, and this is the realm in deep meditation or psychedelic experiences where you have this mystical experience of being one with God. You get all of these, uh, all this information, and the more raw that information is without your interpretation of it, the less narrative you put into it, the more clear it becomes. And there's a universal pattern to these truths that you can experience non-conceptually. But the problem is then when you then try to go back into the dualistic realm and try to explain it,
You have to go
then
back
you're just
down the
trapped.
ladder that you kicked
Yeah,
away. Yeah,
you're going down and you're trapped again in the conceptual dream that we're living in. So that's my answer. Like that's my solution to these hard problems in epistemology. Uh, yeah, it's a paradox. Like you cannot get to the absolute truth, but by me saying it, I'm staying in absolute truth. We need to get out of it, or we can
Yep.
now dive into it, knowing with an awareness of what we're
That's
doing.
exactly right. That's
Yeah,
exactly
exactly.
right.
So that's the uh, yeah,
It's understanding that in one way, shape, or form that there is an exception to the rule that you're giving, right?
yeah,
Any
exactly.
any truth proposition, however applicable it can be, however universal it may be, there's very few that rise to the level, if any, of having no exception or having no perspective in which that's not true or something to that effect. I loved your explanation because it actually um, uh, the postmodern relativists that you were speaking of were hearkening back to a problem that Gödel's incompleteness theorem highlighted, which is that obviously he was trying to understand this in a mathematical context and trying to understand how to develop an axiomatic basis of a system of math without that needed no reference outside of itself. And his incompleteness theorem basically posited that no system is complete in and of itself, such to where it would need no reference outside of itself to explain it. So what you were talking about with um, the definitions of words themselves needing defining in order to understand the definition to the word you were originally trying to define. Um, but that's actually what leads me to like Rene Descartes and radical skepticism, right? This notion that there is an exception to every rule. I think the way the way he formulated his cogito, was essentially realizing that no matter how certain he believed he was about anything, that it very well and simultaneously was just as plausible, or at least was plausible enough to require consideration, that he could have been wrong. He could have been in a state of psychosis, hallucinating his rationality. So he could have been in the middle of a schizophrenic break, thinking and feeling and perceiving rationality where only irrationality existed, or even altogether could have just been dreaming and not known it, right? And so that those three examples of just being wrong or possibly being mentally ill, or having a mental episode, or being in a dream when he thought he was awake, were each enough. Any one of those was enough to discredit any just about any truth he could propose. Gravity pulls things to the ground, so gravity must be true in and of itself, or true, a properly basic belief, right? Well,
Yes.
his radical skepticism led him to the realization that if he was dreaming and in a dream and only thought that gravity functioned as he now perceived it to, well, then gravity might, in the real world, might not exist at all. It might be a phenomena that's isolated to his mind, and him perceiving his dreamlike world as being what's real when there could possibly be no such thing as gravity, right? And what that led him to, I think, through his cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is this realization that perhaps the only absolute that we could put out there is the absolute belief or presupposition even of our own existence, right? He equated, and I differ from Descartes in this way. He equated the thinking mind or the thinker, which I think is more appropriate than the thinking mind or the thinking itself. But he equated thinking with existence. I would equate the awareness of thought or the awareness itself as that which exists. But that's a mute point. But he equated thinking with existing, and that was the only indubitable starting point that he could logically posit, right, as a necessity, right? And that actually is what the basis of my presupposition, my transcendental presuppositional approach. So it's not Hume's presuppositionalism, even though that's where the basis of it kind of began, this transcendental presuppositional apologetic approach that I utilize. But through its many iterations, going through Christianity, and landing in a form that's that became very well articulated in the 60s through the work of Van Til, who's a Reformed Calvinist. It leads me to this realization that if I was comparing a worldview with another, that the only thing that I can hold with absolute certainty would be my own existence, and that everything else is open to relative degrees of interpretation or possibilities, that it's relative in the sense that it's not absolute, because it could be wrong, right? But that there are certain elements, certain concepts, certain notions in life that are necessarily true for coherency. So, for instance, you and I would both agree that language is a human construct. It is finite. It has its limitations, and that ultimately we imbue the meaning into the words rather than necessarily inferring meaning that's absolutely inherent or integral to that word, right? Dog here could mean something 3,000 years ago, and it didn't matter that either the words were spelled the same or that they sounded the same. They meant two different things. That there's a relativity to language that is not absolute, and yet, in order to understand any worldview, at least to communicate it from one mind to another, we have to presuppose a certain level of meaning to words, right? So whether it's mathematics, language, telos, obviously the existence of the self, but we also presuppose other. There are so many. I think maybe a list of 10 or so necessary presuppositions to make any worldview coherent, and to give the possibility of knowledge that, in addition to the one absolute of our own self-existence, there are only a handful or so other necessary presuppositions that are themselves not absolute, but are acknowledged as relative, but also acknowledged as being necessary to make sense of any other worldview, that from there, other than the one absolute, everything could be brought into question, and that only a short list of 10 or 11 presuppositions are necessary to make sense of any other worldview. But that from that point, everything is truly relative. Everything is truly perspectival, right? you look at one thing from any number of different perspectives, and at a certain point, the clarity or the absolutivity of that concept breaks down, right? Um,
Yeah, and yeah. To just to sum it up, I totally agree. Um, there's this philosopher and engineer called Alfred Korzybski. He had he wrote a book called I think it was called Science and Sanity, where he outlined this problem with the truth, that problem of truth, essentially absolute truth. And he just spoke about it this way. It's the same way you did it. He just said, like, if you have a cup, for example, you the statement the cup is this is a cup. It's like makes sense, but if you when you watch the cup, it's from one perspective. Like you could watch it from here, underneath it, on top of it. And the thing is, you don't have all the perspectives of knowing the the cup. So that means that you cannot know it absolutely, the truth of it. That's
mhm,
only in the mind of God, like this all like perfectly perspective. And then it becomes even more interesting because you cannot know the cup. To know it, it's because it's interconnected with the rest of reality. You can only know it by knowing all of reality because that's connected to the existence of the cup. So that it just creates the problem that absolute knowledge can only be in the mind of God, like knowing everything at the same time, being interconnected with
absolutely.
everything. It's impossible for us as limited beings with this perspective. We have one perspective, and in this one perspective, we can then have many other perspectives on something. Just knowing that can set you free in a way that you don't seek it. You don't seek the knowledge in this realm, this truth, like the absolute truth about the cup. It's like just let it go. It's not possible. You will always have one perspective that is relative. To sum up the problem between like modernism and postmodernism, it's like in the paradox there's the solution to it, that why like both of the perspectives are correct, because um when you say truth is relative, for example, it's it is true for that. It's like it's relative, but it's also true that it's relative. There's like the modernist coming in saying it is true, and then they're saying no, it's relative. They're both right at the same time. That's the beautiful part of it. Like you need your left and right brain hemispheres. None of them are correct. They're
Yep.
correct in the dynamic between them. And then you get into, for example, politics. It's the same. The left are not right. The right are not correct. It's the symbiosis of them working
Yep.
together that is correct. So there's a lot of problem that can be solved philosophically using this dualistic lens, watching it through this. Yeah, so I completely
Well,
agree.
so and you know what's interesting too? I think I was just talking to a guy yesterday. By the way, I have a debate set up on Pangburns Universe, which is a YouTube channel and a Discord for next Friday, by the way. But I was on one of their live streams and I got into a conversation with an individual, and oh, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, we were talking about coherence theories of the coherence theory of truth versus the correspondential theory of truth, right? And how they're not mutually exclusive, and that ultimately you would want any truth proposition to be vetted or meet the standard of both the correspondential as well as the coherence theory of truth, right? Not one or the other. But in that same way, any true metaphysic would would ideally seek to explain the epistemic issues that we're highlighting. So it's almost like the best metaphysic or ontology would be one that gives an explanation as to why we have this epistemic issue of relativity and absolutivity and the interplay between the two, right? And so, from a panpsychist perspective, at least, if we consider the possibility that God's knowledge is inexhaustible, infinite, and that essentially reality as we know it uh, is playing out in the mind of God, with God as the ultimate subject or perceiver, the observer to that interplay. if every piece of knowledge that could be exists within the mind of God, then that would mean in some way, shape, or form, everything that could be true is true in some way, or in some place, or in some form. And so that really brings in that relativity aspect to just about everything, and including because again, as you said, if we say that everything is changing, if that changes, well, then everything doesn't always change. But if to say everything is changing is a statement that shouldn't or wouldn't change, where it's a self-refuting statement, right? But that there's a reason for that, and I think with panpsychism, it allows for a unique explanation as to why we find this paradoxical, circular, foundational kind of quirk, right? I think you said it well, that the paradox is in a way a glitch of the matrix, or at least a glitch in the finite mind trying to perceive the infinity that within which we all exist, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like almost it's almost a design glitch for us to notice, to wake up. It's like diving into these questions and keep hitting the wall, keep going in a circle. At some point we just notice, like, okay, the truth must be somewhere else than in this realm. We must go somewhere else to look at after this sense we're having of absoluteness, of oneness. Because we are, and I really believe that the motivation for this is just the pure displeasure and anxiety of not knowing this truth, that just noticing that we cannot be true in anything. That's what this frustration and chaos, and all the mental problems that are coming with the lack of understanding and lack of union with God. It just leading us back to God. That is because that's where the answers are, and this, and as you said, it's a panpsychic God. It's um it's yeah, it's just withhold all the answers that will reconcile these paradoxes in philosophy and also in science at some point. And that's where you end up coming back to this realm of union, because that's where the answers are, and you will just heal yourself in this union and understand everything. Then you can then go back into the experience, notice, like, with the awareness that you're here to experience and evolve. And it doesn't mean that there's not a pointer, that there's not also a moral system that you want to like gravitate toward, what we call the good. It's just noticing that when you're doing that to like not hit the mark, to sin, it has a purpose. It has a purpose for you to evolve. So that's why you also can forgive yourself and others, and also historically, because as we talked about on a just personal timeline, when you did something wrong, you will learn from it, and you can then. But if you didn't have the experience, you couldn't evolve. And collectively, without these big tragedies we had collectively in our history, we couldn't evolve to greater stages, and we couldn't be grateful for not having these. We need war to. There's a lot of lessons in war, for example. We need them to evolve collectively. That was why they're here. And yeah, it just gives you like this, as you said. I think you said it really well. This more. Let's, for lack of a better word, I don't know what to call it even now. Like this Gnostic worldview. It's just it has explanatory power that is beyond traditional religious theology. It really explains these issues. It maybe not be a satisfying answer for a lot of people. They will not like it, but that again comes back to the attachment issues people are having with a narrative that is more comfortable for them. But if you're a seeker of the truth, you shouldn't be afraid in the end of see where that leads you, because it is when you realize it is full psychosis. It feels like completely manic. It's like it is crazy diving into these realms, because you're breaking all boundaries down. You're diving into forces and getting information that you maybe would not like about reality. And And to be honest, like it's not that it's hard to ground yourself in that reality.
Mhm.
But
Well,
yeah,
so as far as grounding too, I think that that's part of the realization that you come to, is that the reason why it's so circular and we keep almost circling the drain, and as we get progressively wiser and more learned or gain more understanding, that the concentric circles that we're spiraling around get smaller and smaller, that the root or the foundation, where the grounding for the worldview is truly simply in the present moment. It's in the center. It's centrism, not just politically but ideologically, existentially. It's here and now. The foundation and the grounding is in this present moment, right? And that's difficult because this present moment is oftentimes, we see this with meditation and the like. It's this present moment with drug use. Even this present moment is what we're trying so often trying to escape from, rather than root ourselves in.
yeah, exactly, absolutely. Yeah, so that's where the answer to the suffering is. It's where
Yeah.
it's like surrendering um in this and grounding yourself in this unity where all the explanatory power is, because
Hmm.
it gives all the suffering a context where it becomes bearable uh,
Hmm.
out of suddenly. And yeah, and people just, and as we talked about, most people they have to hit rock bottom somehow in life to wake up, and
Yeah.
that's where like suffering is uh, connected to enlightenment in that way. That's why you see that, yeah, often you see the pattern of really disturbed minds waking up because they're really, either like you see it with the gang members, for example, out of nowhere they're just
Wes
so
Wes
tired. Yeah,
Wes
yeah,
Watson.
yeah, exactly. There's so many characters like drug addicts, criminals, the like what we would call the worst people on earth, often are the ones getting most enlightened because they are
Hmm.
just hitting rock bottom in life in such a hard way that they're like seeking an answer
Yeah.
for their suffering, or like a way out. They cannot find it in this realm, so that's what we're all doing. We're trying to find a way out, like through
Yeah.
then instant gratification or pleasure. But we cannot find it. We find it in religiosity, and it works. But there will still be for most people like a weird sensation that something is not right. That you need something else, and that else is on the other side. And yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so two things. To your point, I think you mentioned criminals and drug addicts have a lot of incentive, or oftentimes have great reasons to pursue spiritual truths or truth in general, right? I think the same thing is true of like Teal Swan, who had, if you kind of dive into her story, she had a lot of psychological trauma, and that fueled and motivated her to reach levels of awareness and enlightenment that both you and I respect. But hey, let's jump into panpsychism whenever we get back. Let's take a break though for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
yeah. I was about to say the same. We'll just get something
Perfect,
to drink. Perfect.
perfect. Take your time. See you soon.
I'm back.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, I think something you had touched on right before we went right before we went on break was we started touching on panpsychism, right? And
Yeah.
give me 1 second. Was panpsychism. And that individual I told you I had that conversation with just a few days ago, panpsychism was brought up, and there's an individual by the name of Donald Hoffman. He's a neuroscientist out of UCLA or something, and he's a panpsychist, and he came to mind earlier because he was talking, whenever you mentioned the hard problem of consciousness, he actually has a really great explanation as to the difficulty that we have in the reason why the hard problem of consciousness is considered the hard problem of consciousness. But he's a panpsychist, which I really admire some of his work, a lot of his work. He comes from it from a very scientific perspective, and he's actually posited almost a mathematical a mathematically or an empirically based mathematical model to understanding consciousness, which is odd to me, but like I said, he has a lot of great arguments, and I could actually post his video soon. I think I should. But there's another one by the name of Jared Goff, and what I've tended to notice about panpsychists is very similar to Descartes. Panpsychists, and I guess it might have something to do with the name, but panpsychists tend to end the exploration at the mind rather than going one level beyond and rooting it in the consciousness that has the mind rather than the mind itself, right? And I've gone back and forth on this myself about understanding in some senses why they do that, but in very fundamental ways that I think it's better to go that extra step and to root it in awareness or consciousness rather than in mind. But that essentially the Gnostic form of panpsychism is essentially life in its totality, or all that we know of life from an individual perspective. My life and all that I know of it, your life and all that you know of it, is all reducible to experience, right? We have sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, which are external experiences or experiences of the external world, should I say, quote unquote. But then we have thought and emotion, which are internal phenomena, right? But apart from those 7 means, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, and emotion, there's no other means by which for us to know or have knowledge of or experience anything externally or internally. Such that what we could say, I think, as a very blanket statement, is that life in its totality, to us individually at the very least, is reducible to experience. And that for there to be an experience logically necessitates an experiencer. And so what we have is this very nice, clean dichotomy or duality between experience and experiencer, or consciousness, awareness, and what it's aware of, right? Subject, object, perceiver, perceived, right? And that panpsychism basically plays in that model. That actually a very are you familiar with Quine? So
Yeah, but not to be honest, not
yeah.
not profoundly in any way.
Yeah. So V.O. Quine, I think it's VAO Quine, to be honest with you, but like J.R.R. Tolkien or something. But V.O. Quine wrote perhaps the most famous philosophical paper of the 20th century called The Two Dogmas of Empiricism, where he compared analytic philosophy to synthetic, or sorry, the analytic approach to the synthetic approach of knowledge, right? And in it, he has a famous quote where he says that up to that point, and this is like the 1950s, 60s, maybe 70s, he said, and I quote, mankind has yet to provide a sufficient justification for the belief in the existence of the external objective material world. And so what that really means is if you look at the concept of objectivity or objective in a philosophical sense, objective simply refers to that which is separate from the mind or the subject perceiving it, right? And what V.O. Quine says in that quote is that, we actually haven't yet provided a sufficient justification for there to even exist something that is external to the mind or external from the subject, so that what we consider philosophically objective, such as this table, right, that it's philosophically presumed or presupposed that this table that I'm perceiving is not simply an internal phenomena happening within my mind or my brain, but rather it is an internal perception or qualia of something that actually physically exists separate from me, right? And what Quine says is basically that's the presupposition that we all operate on, but that has up to that point, up to the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, that has actually never been sufficiently justified that there exists an outside of us. And what panpsychism does is it wrestles within that space. It goes, okay, if we haven't yet justified something external to us, well, not only is that an unjustified presupposition of almost every single worldview, but that panpsychism uniquely resides within that category. And I can't even think of another example, but within that category of worldviews that don't necessitate that presupposition. We don't need, as panpsychists, don't need to presuppose this external world and thus have an unjustified presupposition, because the presupposition, or because the assumption that panpsychism works within is simply that there is a self that exists and that there's a mind that it is aware of. And if you think of mind or qualia in general, we can very easily make the connection that, well, qualia wouldn't necessarily be something separate from the consciousness perceiving it, but rather qualia could very well be, and probably is, in my estimation, is inherent within the conscious, or existing within the consciousness perceiving it, right?
Yeah. And I think yeah, it's spot on. There's also argument from the philosopher and cognitive scientist David Chalmers, who's also one of the few panpsychists out there. And maybe I'm wrecking his argument if I cannot remember it correctly, but it goes something like this: that you can imagine a video camera. That camera, it can detect movement, and it will turn it against the objects moving, filming them. But there's no awareness in the camera. So it's like a machinery. It's observing things and moving according to a program. And his argument is that we don't need consciousness to function. So that's the argument. Like, the question is, why is consciousness put inside these organisms? Because you could actually imagine yourself fully functioning without being aware of the whole experience. So it's really trippy to dive into his argument, but it's like this: imagine that when something is happening, you are programmed to, something walks by, you are, cat or whatever, you do this, you watch it. You can have all these functions going on. You can even have a life with a family, talking, interacting, without any awareness of it. It's so trippy because it's all functional, mechanic, instrumental. The fact that you're experiencing it, it's like this. There could be a movie going on without any sitting in the cinema watching it. The movie would still go on. Life, like it's happening right now, there's no need for a conscious experience of it in itself. It could just
Yep.
happen because it's in that way deterministic. So that his argument is just that the fact that consciousness is there is a proof of a panpsychist realm, that it's the basis of it. Experience itself is the basis of the physical reality, because it doesn't need to be there in the first place. There's
Yep.
no need for it, and so it's
Well,
like it's set up for like a movie. It's set up in a way that the experiencer is for some weird reason plugged into the reality without
yeah.
any reason to be there. But then the question would be, why would there be an experiencer? But that's the point. Why would there be a creation exactly for the experiencer to experience it? So it's like
Well,
going into the cinema and like saying, why is there a movie here? But you wouldn't ask that question. You'd just be watching the movie,
right.
And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly what we're doing right now.
Well, I had a debate once with this YouTube philosopher by the name of T Jump. I had like three with him, but one of the first ones, the hard problem of consciousness came up, and what we had kind of hashed out throughout that was that the hard problem of consciousness exists only in worldviews that presuppose an external objective material world, because those that don't, such as panpsychism, don't incur the hard problem of consciousness, because we don't need to explain why it exists, because it's not an anomaly to our worldview, but rather it's the basis or the feature of our worldview, and we only need to agree that it exists, right? And kind of the same problem.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, well, what we kind of hashed out too, he didn't agree with me, but we kind of worked through these conclusions, is that the problem of induction is also not a problem that panpsychism incurs. And there was another one too, but simply because it's primarily rationalistic and deductive by nature, that the problems with induction and its probabilistic nature are not we're not trying to predicate a worldview on induction, but rather right. So in that same sense of not incurring the hard problem of consciousness, we also don't incur the problem of induction, and trying to predicate a worldview on probability rather than certainty, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it's so interesting. Like when I dived into all these questions, for example, the problem of induction too, I'm just ending up in paradoxes anywhere I go. Take
Anyway,
induction, for example. Apply the principle of induction to the principle itself, and it detonates again. You see, you
yeah,
cannot base the future on the past, or it's like that's what we're doing. But apply that principle to the inductive principle, and then you could ask, why not?
yeah.
And it because
Oh,
just because
that
you
makes a
see,
lot of sense. Yes,
yeah,
yes. That's
it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
trippy. It's so trippy. It's like just because we did that for so many, the principle has been like this for so
yeah,
many
yeah,
decades. That's it's itself based on past experiences.
yeah, yeah,
So the whole concept of induction self detonates as well.
yeah, yeah.
You can take,
Well,
and it's with any example, logic, whatever. It's like, yeah, it works so far, but will it work tomorrow? We don't know.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But and then we create a principle, but even the principle itself maybe is also based on induction, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
must be have the same we must have the same skeptical approach towards it. So again, we end up in a paradox we cannot solve. It goes in a circle, and we also talked this on another day, like even with um in normative ethics, you have the great conflict between deontology and consequentialism, for example. The same way, I found like these concepts are all uh, going in a full circle. Also, they are ending up in the same place, like the yin yang dynamic. When you have consequentialism, you end up in a deontological position. Essentially, I found out. So it's so crazy. You say you should only act in a certain way that maximizes utilizes something based on the consequences, and then they will say you should act like this, you know. But it becomes a principle you should follow.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, why should you follow this principle, in the first place? It becomes the deontological position. Then you should follow the consequential position, whatever that is, in and of itself suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with the deontological position. It will also, so it's like consequentialism will collapse into deontology, and deontology will collapse into a consequentialism in some form, because it is impossible to have to act without referring to the consequence of it in some way. So it's
Well,
like yeah.
no, I was going to say, I think that's exactly what Quine was getting at in his paper, that analyticity and the synthetic approach, it's not one or the other, but they're both necessary. And the same thing with even rationalism and induction, or the coherence model of truth and the correspondential model of truth, that it's essentially not, you can't solely predicate or begin in any one without necessitating the other. And
Exactly.
the second that you do, you get into a lopsided position that is easy to point out the errors and inconsistencies, or simply the deficiencies of it. Now, as you're talking about these moral models, I don't have a lot of experience with ethics and morality in the philosophical sense, but as you're explaining it, that it's the same dynamic that exists
Exactly.
between all these dualities.
I think that is that is like the core of this like Gnostic philosophy that we're dealing with regarding epistemology, that will solve all of the classical problems in philosophy, that, like, again, as you said, when you point toward the one polarity of the spectrum, you imply the other by necessity. That's essentially the fundamental uh, truth that is inherent in all these problems, and that
Mm-hmm.
will solve them. When you point towards the fact that everything is relative, you're implying absolute truth. When you're talking about absolute truth, it implies one perspective that is relative. So
Yep.
it's like this, and then you can apply this principle to every aspect of human affairs, and you will begin to dive into a deeper understanding of them. We also talked about politics, for example, and it's all it's all um, it's all based on this principle. Like, you have two brain hemispheres that are working together, left and right. We know that political preferences are now is mainly based on neurochemistry. If you are a dopamine driven person, you have a tendency to be on the left more. If you are low on dopamine
See,
production, more on the other neurotransmitters, then you will be tend towards conservatism. And because it, like, the left will in a certain way represent chaos and progressiveness, going into the unknown. Conservatives are more about establishing order, going with what works. But it's the dynamic between the two that makes a civilization move forward. The conservatives is someone we need to create stability, and so we don't throw out what works too fast. The progressive are needed because we need to move forward as well, getting into new territory, getting new information. But the one cannot survive without the other. So here comes the same principle again. If you take a stance that I'm on the left is correct, you are implying the right by necessity. That it's like incredible when you notice it. What's a
well,
progressive idea 100 years ago is now a conservative idea. They are
yep.
embedded in each other. We talked about this in the last chat as well. The Republican Party, or the Democratic Party, was in the past a super racist party connected with the KKK and the South, and
Yeah, yeah,
it changes. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like you apply the principle, and you can solve politics. Even you can get to actually a close absolute answer to how to do politics, how to do morality, how to do epistemology, life, everything. It's
Well, and you can
quite
see that same,
remarkable.
yes, yes, and you can see that same dynamic. I just thought about this as you were talking about the political dichotomy and interplay there. You see the same thing in traditional historic gender roles. Go back 1,000 years, and it would be the females who would be almost like the conservatives. They're conserving or preserving the village and the offspring, right? And it would be men who would be going out, taking risks, hunting, foraging, making war, and a functioning society needed both, right? You couldn't have one without the other, and obviously that has the we're obviously living in a different age in terms of gender roles and the like, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and not only is it fluid and it's changing, you could even see the same thing in American politics in terms of who would have supported war against Russia as an adversary 30 years ago versus now. 30 years ago, it would have been the Republicans who were war hawks and who would have considered Russia a mortal enemy. But now, fast forward post-Trump era, or through the Trump era and now post-Trump era, and you have Republicans who are saying we should stay out of Ukraine and allow Russia to do what they want to, and you have Democrats saying no, we need to stop Russia. But it was Ronald Reagan, and during that era when the wall, what was it called? The divide in Germany between Eastern Germany and Western half of Germany. What was the wall?
What was the wall called?
Yeah, the wall. Remember the wall?
The Berlin Wall?
Was it called the Berlin Wall? Yeah.
Yeah, the divided East and West. Yeah, exactly.
Right. During that era, it was the conservative Ronald Reagan who said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall, right? And it was the Republicans who were seen as being ready and willing and proactive in terms of their opposition of Russia. And it was the tempering attitudes of the Democratic Party at that time that were always trying to keep us from it. Now look at Ukraine, and those roles are absolutely reversed. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, dude, and it's interesting symbolically how that makes sense in a grand sense. When you're tearing down the walls of dualistic thinking, then the spectrum becomes united with itself again, because it always was. There was no separation to begin with between polarities, and that's why if you bring in a Jungian approach to thinking about the centrist position, as we talked about earlier, that you'll begin to see the attachment to one political ideology, for example, on the left, will automatically imply a shadow side to that position, which would be the right that is suppressed in that individual or collective or civilization. So when you have, it's an interesting thought when you have that, when you bring in the Jungian aspect, because what you will see is just that society is basically based upon people who are leaning towards left and right, based on neurochemistry, because there's a larger purpose with dividing humans up like this, because then you will have a perfect symbiosis of people staying and creating order and somebody progressing. So it's not a coincidence. It is like this. But not being aware of that would mean that you have a shadow side that is not integrated collectively. So like you can do Jungian psychology on an individual level, just imagine that a society like, take USA, for example, America, there is then just the left has just an unintegrated shadow side that is the right aspect, and vice versa with the right. They're not integrating the leftist part in themselves. So the union comes when the left and right integrates their own shadow sides, which is the other party. When the left recognizes the right in themselves, that is where the healing begins. And that it's interesting because that relates to the sentence also, that you can see yourself in others because you're containing them already. So when a leftist person are noticing that a right-leaning person is someone they can relate to because they contain that part in themselves, Because right now they don't believe that. That's the funny thing. They don't see the underlying function of right-wing politics. But when they do that, they will just notice this. They will go, "Oh, I'm just with my neurochemistry and personality type gravitating towards left-leaning beliefs. That's all I'm doing." But then you can transcend that simplistic thinking and notice that you're playing a part in a bigger puzzle. And then when you're transcending it, you can see, okay, I'm like a being used by my genes to propagate left-leaning politics. My part in this play is to progress and innovate and be creative. That's my purpose. But I'm not doing that without my partner here that is the right-leaning. I need them
That
to ground me.
counterbalance, that
Yeah.
counterweight. Yeah.
So there's not. Then you can actually do politics. Like you can go and be a left-leaning person, but you're not doing it in the same way. You're just you're doing it for the sake of honoring the right that is your partner in a way that is grounding society when you do it. So when you come up with all these crazy innovating ideas that left-leaning people are doing, that let's try this, let's do this now. Like for example, with all the transgender thing going on, in a way, it's totally fine that they're theorizing about all of this or trying it out. They're doing that, but they without then the rest of society, the conservative side, saying, "Guys, slow the fuck down, like calm down." If they didn't do that, the left would spin out of control. They will like annihilate themselves. So when the left notice this, that when even the most radical leftists are noticing, okay, these ideas are getting a little bit crazy now, it's because the right part of society is not holding them back to standard. Because
Yep.
now the left is noticing that these ideas are getting fucking insane.
Yes.
Like it's
Yes.
because there's
Yes.
it's unleashed. They need a leash, and that leash is the in a non-kinky way, it's the right that's gonna hold them to a certain standard and say, okay, let's slow down with innovating these abstract ways, new ideas about how society should be, and just that not only theorizing, they're like implementing them in society, you know. So
I think
it all makes sense. Then you can allow both, but you just need to know your role and honoring the shadow side. Then you then integrate and then become a left and right leaning person at the same time. You're just leaning towards one or the other with a larger purpose in mind, and then you can
I was going to say a perfect example of what you're talking about like for instance in the United States with identity politics, the right having not done enough, and you see this in the split within the left, is where you see females or feminists who would have historically stood up for progressive policies such as more rights or in the defense of the LGBTQ community. Now you see almost, I don't want to say a civil war, but a conflict and a disagreement between those two elements within the left, where women are saying, hey, some LGBTQ policies or beliefs are actually infringing on the feminist rights which we've worked hard to get, such as transgender men competing in women's sports, things like that. And I think you were spot on that it's actually a result of the right not doing enough or having done it incorrectly leading up to where we are now. But we're actually going to wrap it up here, I think, real soon. But I wanted to give the description that Matt gave me of this Jungian centrism, or perhaps just centrism in and of itself, in its purest form. And he said the centrist position is embracing the dialectic process, honoring the left and the right polarities, and still choosing a position knowing that it could change. You could take a conservative position as a centrist on an issue and not knowing that might change 5 years from now, depending on the dynamics or the reality of the situation as it evolves 5 years from now, or take a left-leaning approach on a completely different policy and not being limited to left or right and not being bogged down in any one position, but finding true balance and the true center in the macro or in the aggregate, right? Not any individual position, or not even adhering to any individual past position that we held. I could have been for LGBTQ rights in every sense of the word, and then now I could, 5 years ago, and now I could hold some positions or beliefs that may limit the extreme that LGBTQ ideology has gone to, while fixing those, and then in turn going, no, again, I'm for LGBTQ rights, and that interplay between embracing it, showing restraint, and then re-embracing the new restrained position on it, right?
Dude, exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead. No, I just
Yeah,
wanted to highlight your definition because I thought it was
dude,
excellent, and I think it's beautiful.
It's spot on, and we're doing it on an individual level already.
Mhm.
So you just have to notice it when you have a conservative and a leftist side in you already. You can, for example, with medicine, you probably, when you get sick, you go to the doctor. That's your position. Then suddenly, when, let's say, you get cancer, and the traditional approach doesn't work, most people, even the most conservative, becomes progressive in a way. Their mind are forcing them to seek new options to
Yes.
solve it.
Yes.
So even most conservatives that wouldn't believe in chakra healing or whatever it is, they actually begin to become more open because their brain will forcing them to do it to survive. They seek new territories of medicine in desperate need for a cure of this cancer. But even though they, before the cancer, prior to the cancer, would pray only for traditional medicine, and they would maybe mock all the spiritual healers, alternative medicine, the community of alternative medicine, and say it's nonsense and we should avoid it. But when they get the cancer and it cannot be cured by traditional medicine, they will dive into the unknown, trying to solve it.
Yeah.
That's a conservative part becoming progressive out of necessity.
Yeah.
So you can have both. You can be a conservative leaning person, but sometimes you are moving into a progressive territory to solve problems. It doesn't mean that you're then abandoning what works already, and you just take that principle on a societal scale doing politics. Then you can go out and seek new options for how to whatever, like to enhance society in some way. You're like brainstorming, and then you try to implement something once in a while that is new, that we haven't tested. That's a progressive thing to do.
Absolutely.
Society needs that, but you can still be a conservative and at heart, like, just honoring. But you will be that just out of the fact that your brain chemistry doesn't allow you to be more open than you are. But still, you can transcend that essentially, and noticing your part in this role. And when you do that, you will not be attached to the position in a way where you will neglect and try to stop the progressive part of society, because you understand the function of it and you then honor it, and you're actually happy for the leftists are trying to advance society towards new in this realm where the cure for humanity survival lays. And the left will do the same towards the right, be honoring them for keeping up with traditions that keep society in order, and they can be grateful for that, like, because the progressive personality types are more chaotic. They need grounding. The things that grounds them is the conservative community and culture, and vice versa. So it all goes up in a perfect harmony in the end. And I really hope that this talk, or like the basic principles, made sense for people when they're watching them. And it made people think, because as we talked about, as you brought up, I think the most profound point to take from this is the explanatory power of this system. This idea is mind-blowing, also for me.
Yes.
That it in and of itself points towards itself the truth we're talking about. Like it's so powerful that when you don't focus on it, you're just ending up in paradoxes, confusion, just madness. Everything becomes ridiculous. But when you have your focus on this panpsychic idea, everything just makes sense.
Well,
I cannot come up with a better argument than that. That is like, it's just yeah.
I think you're exactly right. In the explanatory power is so profound that is actually the justificatory force for it, right? That the justification for its validity is in large part due to its broad, comprehensive explanatory potential and the power to be able to explain things that others fumble with. So we were talking about theodicy before. The difficulty in a satisfactory way explaining explaining the problem of evil, the way that Gnosticism, panpsychism, and just the general epistemology we've utilized to get to these answers is itself the part of the justification for it. It's unique. It's even when we were talking about the presupposition or the unjustified presupposition of the objective world, part of the justification for this position is because of how well it's able to explain the world, completely devoid of a very large unjustified presupposition. So I tend to very much agree.
Spot on.
Hey, Mac, we're going to head off here now. I want to appreciate you again. Hope to do this again next week. Everybody, if you've made it this far, please share, and definitely subscribe, engage in any way. And I appreciate you again, Mac, and hope to see you guys next week.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having this talk. Take care.
Hey, thank you, Mac. Take care, brother. See you guys.